Right now, the world is siding with Russia. The Kremlin is gaining new allies right in the heart of Europe. The European Union is on the brink. Orban is forging a new anti-Ukrainian alliance right under Brussels' nose. But he didn't notice how he fell into Ukraine's trap. This is his end. Exclusive details, watch until the end. Sensational, a military avalanche from the Balkans. How Zagreb, Kosovo, and Athens are preparing a decisive contribution to Ukraine's victory. Secret arms shipments from the Balkans. The details of the operation have been revealed. This is something you have to see. Paris has ignited the front. French forces are moving into Ukraine. What are the Allies' plans? France and its partners are opening a new chapter in the war. Europe is preparing a united front against the aggressor. And at this very moment, a coup has begun. A complete failure for the Kremlin. Ukrainian forces have eliminated the invincible FSB operatives. Special forces, Senezh, and the legendary fighters from Kubinka have been wiped out completely. This is the end of the myth of a great Russia. The fire of retribution has flared up in Moscow. Ukrainian drones caused a stir in Putin's capital and its surroundings. Terrifying explosions shattered the night in Russia's capital. Shock, the Kremlin uses prisoners of war as props. Their families are not even allowed to call them. A beautiful show from Putin. Russian prisoners are greeted with the order, back to the front. All this and more in our program, Hotspot. Shock, a pro-Russian bloc in the heart of Europe. A secret plan revealed. In the shadow of the Kremlin, the Visegrad trio, Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic, are forming under the banner of peace with Russia. This makes the Hungarian Prime Minister's visit to Donald Trump all the more important, where Orban will likely defend the Kremlin's interests. But he hasn't yet realized that he's fallen into a trap. All the details are coming up in the report.
Viktor Orban's last push. After many years of criticism and partial isolation in the EU, the Hungarian Prime Minister wants to try to regain his influence in European politics.
Hungarians do not want to be in the same European Union as Ukrainians. If you are in a federal system with someone, you share their fate, and Ukraine is a country with a very complicated fate. Why should we share this complicated fate?
As Politico writes, Orban is seeking to unite the Czech Republic and Slovakia into a new alliance of skeptics that will oppose further military and financial aid to Kyiv. According to his advisor Balázs Orbán, this bloc should coordinate common positions before EU summits in order to influence decisions concerning Ukraine.
I think this will happen and become increasingly noticeable. This worked well during the migration crisis. That's how we were able to resist.
This is about relaunching the old Visegrad Four: Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Poland. But without Poland. Today, under the leadership of Donald Tusk, Warsaw firmly stands on Ukraine's side. Which means Orban is left with those who sympathize with all things Russian. Robert Fico and Andrej Babiš. These are the leaders he wants to unite into a political bloc within the European Council in order to slow down sanctions against the Kremlin and block decisions on military support for Kyiv.
How realistic the creation of such an anti-Ukrainian coalition is, only time will tell. Today, for the most part, the Czech side takes a pro-Ukrainian stance and supports Ukraine. But as we can see, the situation primarily in economic terms can directly influence certain political sentiments in society in one country or another. Is it possible to influence the EU's decisions in this country in this way? Yes, it is possible. Will this Visegrad trio influence the decisions of the European Union? At the present time, the European Union appears to be more unified, and its position is still clear and remains largely pro-Ukrainian.
At the same time, Orban is making loud statements about a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine, which is supposedly going to be signed in Budapest. He insists that the issue has already been resolved, although he does not mention any specific dates. For Brussels, this sounds like an attempt to seize the initiative, not to turn Hungary into a mediator trusted by Moscow. And it is a new move by Orban on the international stage, a meeting with US President Donald Trump. This was reported by Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó, according to Bloomberg. The key topic of the talks will be the impact of American sanctions on Russian oil. Szijjártó noted that this week Hungary is assessing their legal and physical impact. And if necessary, the Prime Minister will personally discuss the situation in Washington.
Viktor Orban himself, on the one hand, remains consistent in his approach, as he has always done. But on the other hand, right now, at this very moment, he may try to seek certain positions that could boost his electoral ratings. That is, even if we suppose if it really happened. If a meeting between Trump and Putin were to take place in Budapest, it would have a symbolic meaning because we all know about our infamously well-known Budapest Memorandum. In fact, it would be a symbolic act. And if as a result of the meeting, an agreement on a ceasefire were actually reached, or some real diplomacy, a genuine negotiation process, then Orban would gain a lot of electoral points. He is very upset right now because he really wanted this meeting to take place in Budapest and for it to actually yield results.
All of this is happening against the backdrop of the upcoming elections in Hungary in April 2026 and the country's loss of standing within the European Union. Recent studies show that Hungary ranks among the lowest EU countries in terms of upholding the rule of law. And recent constitutional amendments have intensified both domestic criticism and international discontent.
Viktor Orban, it's important to understand that he has been leading the government in Hungary for almost 10 years now under a parliamentary republic system. It is the prime minister who is the number one political figure. And that's why his rather lengthy tenure at the top, not as the head of state, since he is not formally the head of state, but nevertheless at the very top of this political hierarchy, and his consistently firm policy, including towards Russia and Ukraine, shows that he feels probably quite confident even now. Although, on the other hand, the sociological polls currently being conducted in Hungary on the eve of the parliamentary elections show that there is a high probability that the elections, or rather his party, will lose. That is, they are trailing behind. Their main competitor, their opponent, already has a different pro-Ukrainian stance, or at least shows sympathy toward Ukraine.
What Orban is doing now is an attempt to somehow hold on to power and influence in Europe. Against the backdrop of the upcoming elections in April 2026, Hungary's declining position in the EU and internal criticism, Orban's strategy looks like a last-ditch effort. But experts warn that the risks to the success of this push are high. For now, only time will tell. Breaking news. The Balkan countries are backing Ukraine. Military aid is rushing to Kiev. Planes and weapons are already on their way. Zagreb, Kosovo, and Athens are ready to arm Ukraine to the teeth. Don't miss it. Next, exclusive details about the contribution of Balkan countries to Ukraine's victory.
Recently, Ukraine received a new substantial package of military aid from Croatia. Ukraine and Croatia have also agreed on joint weapons production. Ukraine's Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal and Croatia's Defense Minister Ivan Anušić signed a joint letter of intent to deepen defense industrial cooperation. He thanked Croatia for providing 13 packages of military aid worth over 200 million euros. We expect the 14th aid package soon and the 15th by the end of this year. During the meeting, we also discussed joint participation in the SAVE mechanism and the possibility of Croatia joining the Pearl initiative. We are grateful for the consideration of this matter. Denis Shmyhal, Minister of Defense of Ukraine. At the beginning of next year, the countries will hold a joint industrial forum for defense product manufacturers. Of course, Croatia is most interested in the production of various drones which have already revolutionized modern warfare. The Croatian side will also assist Ukraine in the matter of demining territories. I noted Croatia's role in the work of the demining coalition. The experience of this friendly country is important to us. In clearing our land, the Croatian company Doking has already delivered 69 demining machines and has started producing spare parts in Ukraine. Denis Shmyhal, Minister of Defense of Ukraine. Greece will very soon supply Ukraine with American-made M110A2 howitzers and 150,000 units of ammunition, and Zuni rockets. This military aid, with a total value of about 199 million euros, will be delivered to Ukraine through the Czech Republic. Also, under pressure from other NATO countries, Greece may sell part of its fighter jets. Mirage 2000.
Greece has already purchased 24 more modern Rafale fighter jets from France. And considering that technical support for the M2005 fighters will end in 2027, Greece is looking to get rid of the old ones. However, negotiations with India over the sale of these fighters have reached a deadlock, and other Balkan countries have also not found any interested buyers. Greece is negotiating with France to acquire another 6 to 12 Rafale fighter jets and is seeking a price reduction in exchange for selling part of the 2000s.
Now Athens is negotiating with France to acquire another 6 to 12 Rafales and is arranging for a lower price in exchange for selling some of the Mirage 2000s to Ukraine. Currently, Greece has 25 such aircraft in service. The United States is putting pressure on the country to purchase more weapon systems as part of the priority needs list program for Ukraine. Therefore, the purchase of some Mirage 2000s from Athens, it's only a matter of time. Even the partially recognized Republic of Kosovo is helping Ukraine. Pristina has announced the delivery of a new package of military aid to Ukraine. The Balkan country is ready to help as much as it can. The details of the aid are not being disclosed. It is known that it includes mortar shells of various calibers, including 120mm, 60mm, and 81mm, military trucks, armored vehicles, and tactical vehicles. We are determined to support Ukraine in every way possible in accordance with our conditions and capabilities. Ejub Makedonci, Minister of Defense of Kosovo. The Minister of Defense of Kosovo posted a video on social media showing the Kosovo security forces and the British Army training Ukrainian soldiers. Eastern European countries and the Balkans are actively assisting Ukraine with various types of weaponry and by conducting training sessions on their territory. Such support clearly demonstrates their attitude toward the Russian world and Putin.
Urgent, Paris is heading to Aban. French soldiers are on their way. Macron is sending troops into Ukraine. The coalition of Ukraine's friends is moving to the front line. Foreign allies are preparing powerful support for Kyiv. France and its partners are preparing to strike the aggressor. Who will arm Ukraine and with what? Exclusive details. The time has come. France is ready to deploy troops for Ukraine in 2026, said Pierre Schill, Chief of Staff of the French Army. The statement about troop deployment came after the top French military leadership warned of the need to be prepared for a confrontation with Russia in 3 to 4 years. Also, as early as next year, the Orion 26 exercises will be held to test the effectiveness of cooperation between different branches of the military, allies, and ministries.
It should be remembered that France and Emmanuel Macron were the initiators of the idea of having foreign troops present in Ukraine. Yes, they did not receive full support from their allies, not even within the European Union. Accordingly, they were forced to back down from this idea, plus the United States of America. During the Biden administration, they said, we can't be at odds with Europe, but we don't want to be in Ukraine, so let's agree that you won't be there either. But now the situation is starting to change. On one hand, Donald Trump says he is not going to defend Europe, not going to defend NATO allies. Then he changes his mind, but for Trump, that's normal. But most importantly, he says that Ukraine is a European problem and Europeans should solve it.
Ukraine may soon receive additional aircraft. Mirage 2000s from France. The relevant decisions have already been made, reports President Volodymyr Zelensky.
This demonstrates that it's not only the US helping Ukraine, because there was an impression that without American weapons, nothing would happen. France says we have Caesars, we have Mirages, we have other things. Weapons that Ukraine is using, and using effectively. So don't forget about them. And the provision of Mirages is a demonstration that we are in the game.
Experts note that Mirages are very effective weapons for shooting down the missiles that Russia uses to attack Ukraine.
Because it is our pilots, flying French Mirages as well as F-16S, who take to the skies during a missile attack. In the air, they intercept Russian missiles and destroy them there. And Mirages play a role in this. So, the Mirage is useful. It's not just a demonstration that France stands with Ukraine. It's also an opportunity to better repel attacks. And in the future, possibly to carry out certain operations, including on the territory of the Russian Federation.
Britain is taking on the task of helping our country with air defense. In the future, the country also plans to help with missiles and the production of interceptor drones.
Even back in 2023. The German Council on Foreign Relations wrote in its report that according to their analysis, within a window of 6 to 10 years after the end of the war in Ukraine, Russia will attack Germany. Specifically Germany, not Europe, but Germany itself will be at war. Since then, the dates have changed there, how much time Russia would need, but the idea that Russia wants to wage war with Europe has not gone away. And sometimes Europeans are emphasized when they want to boost their geopolitical significance, recall this existential threat coming from Russia and say, we are actually ready to train and even send troops to Ukraine.
Spain and Finland have joined the POWs initiative, which allows the purchase of weapons for Ukraine from the United States using partner funds. The president of Ukraine announced this while speaking to journalists in Brussels.
Politically, it is important for Trump so that he can say, "We are not helping Ukraine, we are simply selling weapons to our NATO partners, and what they do with them, whether they give them to Ukraine, is their business." It is very important that ideally all NATO countries are involved. As many countries as possible should participate in this program. I understand that Hungary may be against it, but the main economies are participating. And it's not just Europe, by the way. Canada is also a participant in this program. And sometimes Canada has even paid for specific batches of weapons purchased from the US. And here there's a term for this, a win-win situation. In this case, it's a win-win-win.
Finland has also announced its contribution of 100 million euros for Ukraine. Earlier, Norway announced additional funding of $200 million. As part of the POWs program, 6 NATO member countries have already funded 4 packages of defense support for Ukraine. These are the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Germany, and Canada.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
The Ukrainian armed forces strike without mercy. The FSB elite has been ground to dust. Dozens of eliminated officers from Putin's most prestigious military units. Moscow is silent while propagandists are in a frenzy because this was the backbone of Putin's special forces. This is a serious loss and a blow to the enemy's forces since they managed to eliminate top-class specialists whose training takes many years. Watch for more details right now.
More than 3,000 kilometers. That is the current length of the front line between Ukraine and Russia. Of that, almost 1,000 kilometers is an active combat zone. Hundreds of kilometers where Ukrainian defenders break the backbone of the army that was once called the second strongest in the world every single day. And every meter of this line is a story of courage, loss, and unbreakable will. At this front, not only columns of equipment and infantry are destroyed, but also Russia's military elite. During the full-scale invasion, Ukrainian fighters have eliminated dozens of special forces operatives from elite units. Senezh and Kubinka, those whom even in Russia are called the elite of the elite.
Losses of such fighters are especially painful for Russia. Each of them is not just an ordinary soldier, but a specialist who has undergone years of training. Training a single officer like this takes years and requires significant resources, noted by I Want to Live. Recently,
a documentary was released to the public about the elimination of a sabotage and reconnaissance group from the Senezh Special Purpose Center, which was operating in the Chernihiv region. This operation became one of the most successful since the start of the full-scale war. Ukrainian scouts from the 54th Separate Reconnaissance Battalion, together with border guards from the 105th Prince Volodymyr the Great Detachment, eliminated 6 enemy officers. The bodies of those killed, as well as weapons and equipment, were captured.
Everyone who operates enters Ukrainian territory with their GoPro cameras turned on, and they record all their activities. If you can even call it work. Murder, sabotage, it's essentially terrorism. And they are the first to show this to their, perhaps, commanders or superiors to report back. That's the first thing. And secondly, they post all of this online to intimidate people. There are videos titled, "How I Spent This Summer." And in these videos, there are just such montages of killings of Ukrainians, Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian civilians.
In the center of Sinisha Kubinka are the key units of the Russian Special Operations Forces reporting directly to the General Staff. It is there that the best of the best are selected, those who are supposed to carry out the most complex, covert, and dangerous missions. They are trained using Western methods and deployed in operations outside the country from Ukraine to Africa. But in Ukraine, even such an elite proved powerless. Those whom Moscow calls invisible fighters become visible on Ukrainian fields.
Lie down here. Stand. Come here. I'm holding. 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 Get out. Come on, 3-4.
According to the I Want to Live project, during the war, Ukraine has eliminated at least 58 fighters from the Russian Special Operations Forces of the GRU and FSB. For the enemy's army, this is not just a loss, it's a blow to the core personnel, to those who were supposed to conduct reconnaissance, coordinate operations and prepare new sabotage missions. And while Russian propaganda keeps talking about precision weapons and the professionalism of its army, the reality is completely different. Across more than 3,000 kilometers of front line, Ukraine is not only holding the defense but is also methodically eliminating those whom the Kremlin considers untouchable. And no matter how long Russia continues this aggression, the defense forces will keep giving the same answer. No invader will remain alive on Ukrainian soil. Moscow
is under siege. Drones have broken through right into the heart of Russia. We are digging in. Urgent evacuation. Putin is deploying his miracle air defense to protect the Kremlin. Trouble has crept right up to the dictator. The situation is critical. The Russian Federation is at its limit. More on this in just a moment.
Pickups with machine guns mounted on their roofs are stationed around the perimeter of the Kremlin. It's unlikely that Putin and his generals expected to see such a scene in the fourth year of the war. This past weekend, Moscow and the surrounding region came under a massive drone attack. At night, Domodedovo and Zhukovsky airports were temporarily closed. By morning, their operations had been restored. In the Kommunaka area, explosions were heard during the attack and smoke could be seen rising above the forest. All night long, Moscow Mayor Sobyanin was posting on his Telegram channel about downed drones. Other Russian public channels also reported on the large-scale drone attack.
The armed forces of Ukraine are trying to launch mass attacks on Moscow and the region. Within a couple of hours, 14 drones heading for the capital were destroyed. Explosions in the sky were heard in Domodedovo, Podolsk, Dubna, Ramenskoye, Komunarka, Troitsk, and Kolomna. At Zhukovsky and Domodedovo airports, 5 flights were cancelled and 6 were rescheduled. Restrictions on departures and arrivals were imposed. In
the Moscow region, a massive fire broke out at the Serpukov oil depot as a result of drone strikes. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported that nearly 200 attack UAVs were shot down overnight.
This is not the first time that Russians themselves have recorded more than 40 drones heading toward Moscow. We're trying to bypass the capital's air defense system, which is now deployed directly there. But we understand that all of this is in place. These are specific retaliatory strikes and probing actions, probing to see how to deliver a more effective combined strike.
Recently, Western media published a map of the air defense systems protecting the capital of the Russian Federation. But even through such dense protection, Ukrainian drones managed to slip through. Because of this dense protection of Moscow, other regions and strategic facilities across Russia are suffering.
Analysts clarify that the systems are constantly being moved around. But the majority are concentrated around Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Putin's residence in Valdai. There simply aren't enough systems to protect oil refineries and other strategic facilities in the regions. This is exactly what the Ukrainian armed forces are taking advantage of. In the
Moscow region, explosions were heard near the airfield where Russia's strategic aviation is based. The Sheikovka Strategic Aviation Air Base and Kaluga Airport in the Kaluga region of Russia were also under attack. This is not the first massive drone attack on Moscow and other regions. Even though the Russian Ministry of Defense always underreports the number of drones, almost 200. That's a lot, and their number will only continue to grow.
This has a very serious anti-propaganda effect directly for the Kremlin. Let me remind you that one of the reasons for launching the so-called special military operation was the issue of guaranteeing the security of the Russian Federation itself, as Putin and his inner circle explained it. We are seeing how the war is coming directly to Moscow, and not just to Muscovites. We see that the geography of Ukraine's drone attacks is expanding.
Before the start of the so-called special military operation, drones were not terrorizing ordinary Russians, let alone Muscovites. Now, however, air raid alerts throughout the night are becoming a routine occurrence for Moscow. And perhaps now Russians will have questions and complaints for the master of the Kremlin.
Cynicism without limits. Putin is turning prisoners into props for propaganda. The Kremlin machine keeps grinding on. The soldiers are not given a chance at life. A pretty picture, a dirty truth. The returned prisoners are under total control. More on this in the following report. Hooray! 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 Russian flags, happy faces, and neat clothing. This is how the Kremlin shows the return of Russian prisoners of war to their homeland. Inside,
I am overwhelmed with emotions, very pleasant, warm feelings. I will see my family, my relatives, my children, and my loved ones.
But will he? After all, the happiness didn't last long.
Did you go home after you returned?
No.
Do your parents know that you were captured a second time?
Yes, they know.
How?
I wrote them a letter.
How did it happen that you didn't make it home but ended up back in captivity?
They sent me back to the war immediately.
But before sending prisoners of war back to their deaths, they can still be tormented for another 2 hours or so with interrogations and polygraph tests in FSB units.
It's surprising that they last so little time. Because let me remind you, today's Putin regime is the successor of Stalin's regime.
And what's also amusing is that the time spent in captivity doesn't count toward the length of the contract. Interesting tactic by the Kremlin, isn't it?
Putin just doesn't have enough cannon fodder. That's why everyone who can stand on their feet and go on meat assaults will be sent on meat assaults. And accordingly, it's only natural for Putin that everyone who is exchanged will be sent back to the front. And no one is planning to let them go anywhere because these are already the slaves whom the regime has recorded as its own slaves. And
of course, there is no rest, no meeting with relatives, or, God forbid, any rehabilitation provided for in Russia. After all, you haven't fulfilled your duty to the end.
Just imagine for a moment that they come home after being held captive by Ukraine. And they start telling what is happening at the front and what happened to them in Ukrainian captivity. How they lived, ate, took walks, watched TV, read books, did what they enjoyed. And what will people say about Ukrainians after hearing their stories? Can they really be allowed to interact with people? No, they must be killed immediately.
Also, everyone who goes to the so-called special military operation has a choice. Exactly. Everyone is given instructions on how to act in order not to be captured.
At first, I thought it was some kind of joke, you know, like an army joke. But actually, Siri, it's not a joke at all. These are several ways I'm supposed to commit suicide in case I'm at risk of being captured. And
also, in principle, Russia creates the most comfortable conditions possible for its soldiers and provides everything they need. But apparently, water didn't make it onto that list.
So we drink whatever we can and figure it out as we go.
Apparently, Putin doesn't really care about actually getting his citizens back.
Putin doesn't even consider them people. To him, they're just cannon fodder. Whether they have water or not doesn't matter to him. If there's no water, they'll just drink from puddles. But the main thing is, go and die for the Führer. Putin really does believe there are plenty of people. And Russia's mobilization reserve is indeed large. He believes that his police vehicles, the FSB, the police and so on, are enough to drag anyone to war. Anyone they need whenever they need them. And that's why he doesn't feel sorry for anyone at all.
But there are also those who do manage to return home after the war. Apparently, they were lucky enough not to be captured or poisoned by the supposedly crystal clear water from the ground.
Nothing will go back to normal. I'll listen on the phone now. Contract soldiers can have a set term of service. And when their contract ends, they can return. But it's clear that if someone was already in prison before the war, they already had issues. Their mind wasn't in great shape to begin with. And after fighting in the war, they completely lost it. So there's nothing surprising about that. But let's remember that the regime doesn't consider anyone human. That's why there's no need to care about them, and they don't get any psychological help.
At first, they promised to come back, and not empty-handed either. We'll come back with victory. But in a situation where you're fighting to the death on the front lines for Putin's dreams, it would be good just to come back at all. But unfortunately, even that isn't provided for in Russia itself.
That's all for now. For more hot news from the front, tune in to our next episode.